So, a lot of people, including the current president of the United States, have made the claim that women in America make just 77 cents for every dollar that a man makes. And sometimes you hear 79% or 81%, but whatever, it doesn't matter. But today we're going to explore the gender wage gap and see if it's like really a thing. Now, as I said before, I don't generally use my channel to provide like objective information, but I do like to try and talk about things in a way that I haven't heard other people talk about before. And this is one of those topics where people on both sides of the issue just have a hard time being intellectually honest. And as always, I'm not here to talk at you. I want to start a discussion. If you have something to say, if you agree or disagree, I want to hear about it. So let's take a look. By the way, I'm gonna quote like stats and refer to studies and stuff. The links to those things will be in the description if you want to see it. So indeed, if you look at the literal amount of money made according to the US Census Bureau in 2010, women made 81 cents for every dollar that a man made. So it is clear, it is demonstrable that women do make less money than men. Now, the thing that a lot of people leave out is that these numbers don't take into account things like skill, job choice, education, experience, numbers of hours worked, things like that. For example, it's been argued that women care more about balancing work and family than men do, and often they have to due to having children. So they often take lower paying jobs that provide that flexibility. Also, a survey in 2008 concluded that women on average have less work experience than men, and the pay gap fluctuates depending on the industry and the age and the marital status of the person involved. As an example, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, women who work as bakers or teachers make more on average than their male counterparts, and women in their 20s experience a smaller wage gap than older women, or sometimes no wage gap, or sometimes even a wage gap in their favor. And this has a lot to do with the fact that younger women are graduating college at a higher rate than the previous generation. So what we need to do is find out how much a woman with the exact same qualifications, occupation, marital status, work experience is making compared to the man. Luckily, a lot of folks have already explored that. The US government did a study in 2003 which controlled for experience, education, hours work, and occupation, and found that on average women are still making 20% less than men. Another study concluded that starting salaries for women college graduates are less than they are for men in the same fields. And while I did mention a couple occupations in which women do make more money, that's a couple out of like 100. And it is true that women tend to have less work experience than men, but many studies have found that a year of work experience pays off at a higher rate for men than they do for women. And even when you control for work experience, studies still find a significant unexplained portion of the wage gap. Also, jobs dominated by women like nurses and secretaries tend to pay less than jobs dominated by men like construction workers and engineers. According to a testimony before the US Senate by an economist named Randy Albelda, economists have explored the gender pay gap for many decades and produced hundreds, if not thousands, of articles and reports to explain the reasons for the gender pay gap. No matter how sophisticated and complex their models, they always find that some portion of the wage gap is unexplained by the sets of variables for which they can measure differences between men's and women's education levels, work experiences, ages, occupation, or industry in which they work, or region of the country they reside. The fact of the matter is, you will find no good study or report that claims that women make the same amount of money as men for doing the same amount of work, because that's just not the truth. Overall, there is somewhere between a 10% and 20% unexplained difference in pay between men and women, even when you take into account things like education and experience. And I've seen a lot of articles where they literally say, well, you know, it's only like 80-90% on the dollar, it's not that bad. But no, that's ridiculous. Imagine if two people with the exact same experience and background, and they got hired for the exact same job, and then they were like, okay, we're gonna pay him $70,000 a year, and we're gonna pay her $63,000. For no reason other than she's a woman and he's a man. I mean, it's not that bad. It's 90 cents on the dollar. It's better than 77 cents. Well, it is better than 77, but it's still not fair or acceptable. And then once we acknowledge the unexplained pay gap, then we have to think about why women make the choices they do make that leads to lower pay. I think society's overall attitude towards women comes into play here. Many studies have been done that imply that society overall considers women less competent than men. For example, one study showed that women were less likely to be replied to by by an employer than a man, even if they had identical resumes. Another study showed that men receive significantly higher customer satisfaction scores than women, even if their performance was roughly the same. Psychologist Alice Eagley argues perceived incongruity between the female gender role and leadership roles leads to two forms of prejudice. A, perceiving women less favorably than men as potential occupants of leadership roles, and B, evaluating behavior that fulfills the prescriptions of a leader role less favorably when it is enacted by a woman. So basically, women who act feminine are considered less competent and less suitable for high status roles, and women who are more assertive are penalized and considered out of place. Now, as I mentioned earlier, women tend to take different jobs than men, and they often take a wage penalty because of this, even if the skills, education, and experience required are comparable. For example, it requires similar amounts of education and experience to become a nurse as it does to become an engineer, but engineers tend to get paid more. Women also take a wage penalty if they decide to become mothers. See, our society has sort of built this idea of the ideal worker who basically has no free time and is willing to work at all times whenever their boss needs them to. But people with family responsibilities like mothers don't really fit that role. Now, to me, it seems a little bit unfair to be penalized just because you wanted to start a family, but maybe that's just me. And that's something that primarily happens to women because married men with children actually tend to make more than unmarried men. So is the gender pay gap a myth? No, and in fact, there are like a shit ton of studies that confirm that it isn't. I mean, it is more complicated than the way the president and some other groups put it, but it is there and it can't all be explained away by things like experience and education. So what do we do about it? Well, as you might imagine, I don't have all the answers, but Miss Albelda had some suggestions in her testimony. She suggested that we do more to address and combat discrimination in the workplace, that we improve wages in female-dominated jobs because there's no reason for them to pay less in the first place, and that we avoid discriminating against people who wish to start families. And I'm sure there's more to it, but that sounds like a good place to start. That's just me though. I want to know what you think. Drop a comment. I want to go ahead and give a shout out to all of the new subscribers. How you doing? If you like the video, please press the thumbs up button and subscribe if you like my hair. Holla. And they're basically like, okay, choose what you want to do with the rest of your life right now. Go ahead. Choose. And that sucks because probably you have no idea what you want to do with your life when you're 18 years old. But I am here to tell you that's okay. In fact, that's normal.